This year for March, I'm doing yet another blue theme, and it will be my take on the March Under the Stars bullet journaling event hosted by our precious moderator Charmaine on the Jashi Current Discord community, which is a community-wide event that centers on the idea of showing different takes on a singular theme. And for this first iteration of this event, it is celestial, and I'll be doing moons and night skies. This is very, very fun, but let's get started with the cover page. I was really intimidated by this theme, and usually when that happens, I will do another page before the cover page just to get a feel on the technique, but I wasn't really sure how to go about those pages either, so I decided to bite the bullet and start with the cover page and take it from there. So my idea for the cover page has been inspired by multiple images, but also features a very specific technique for the moon. And I will leave all the inspo that I pulled from in a singular Pinterest board in the description box. But basically I wanted a large blob of a dark blue sky that blends and fades into the white paper. And I pulled a few colors of gouache paint, but ultimately I just used one of those. I had two Parisian blues from two different brands, and I tested them on a spare piece of the white paper beforehand just to figure out which one I preferred more, and I ended up going with the one from Rocco just because it had a more navy undertone. They are very similar, but in real life I could see a slight difference, and I preferred the one from Rocco over the one from Art Rangers. So I used that, and that's basically it. I used like a very watered version of it and then slowly building up the pigment. So at first I thought that I would be using a wet on wet technique. The brush I used, which is the largest I had, still had remnants of red watercolor from the February setup in Project B, even though I set that one up all the way back in maybe September and early October. So I don't know why it's not clean, but anyway, it didn't really affect it much because I'm gonna use blue on top of it. And yeah, I put on some paint and then using circular motion tried to blend it out. And I had mainly two brushes, one to put down the color and the other a clean, slightly wet brush to blend it out. And even though I used just one color to do all of this, there still was a stark difference between the outer ring and the inner ring around the white circle, which is going to be the moon. And I wasn't really sure why that happened because again, I used just one color, so it's supposed to look similar, not so starkly cyan and navy. So what I ended up doing is I mixed a little bit of black with the Parisian blue to get an ultra dark color that also has a little of a grayish undertone, and I used that to tint the stark blue cyan outer ring. And then I also used a very pigmented version of that color on the very inner circle around where the moon would be, because that should be the darkest point. I worked on this for a very long time. This theme took so very long. I had so many hours of footage, like at least 5+ hours on this entire theme. I'll be leaving like a timestamp sort of thing of how long each spread took when we start for that page. So the cover page would have taken me 2 hours maybe, just working on blending this. I also had to expand the circle quite a few times, I think, because I didn't like how high up I positioned it, and also I wanted it to be quite large, so I kept having to expand it after blending, which certainly added to the time taken and the amount of work and layers and water and paint that I've used, and patience. I kept tissues handy because I needed to blot water quite a bit and also test how pigmented the color is on the brush, and I also made sure to clip the sides of the page quite well, so I can reduce the warping a little bit. We still had a great deal of warping, and then at some point I also put down a piece of tissue under the page, and I had trouble and a little bit of a bleed through, but we will easily fix that later. For the moon itself, I will put the video on the screen that I was inspired by. It's a DIY type of video where they were using spackle, I think, or a similar material to make a textured moon wall piece. And I thought I could mimic that in a notebook version using acrylic, because acrylic is very thick and it dries thick if you build it up, and then I could do something similar for texturing it. So I used this very old bottle of white acrylic that actually isn't really great quality, so I wasn't really sad about using a lot of it, and I piled it in that circle. First I tried to get the perfect circle, and then I just piled it on there. And then to texture the moon itself, I used a piece of saran wrap, put it on the moon, and then press on it, to lock in the crevices and the dents and such. And then I used my glass dip pen, but you can use the back of a brush to put circular indents in there, because the moon has, holes from where it was directly hit and such. So I did that, and then I carefully removed the saran wrap and also went back with some acrylic paint just to fix some areas and to add more paint around the holes, so it would be a stark difference between the dip of the hole and the area surrounding it. And that will need a lot of time to dry, which is the downside of this setup and why it took me such a long time to get it done and also post it. But anyway, I was going to use just white paint for the stars, but then I thought, why not use this white shimmer? The reason why I wasn't going to use any shimmers in the beginning was because I didn't want to introduce another color, say gold or silver. So I ended up using this white shimmer. I remembered that I had it. And at first I thought that I would be dotting all those tiny stars, but then quickly remembered that I'm not really good at randomizing these things. So I made a quick, circular shape-ish of tissue paper to cover the moon, so I wouldn't get any glitter on that, and then wet my brush quite a bit and tapped it with my finger to get a smattering of stars. With this close-up, you can see in great detail how textured the moon is, and I kept it to dry overnight before I started working on it. And the great thing with having done this with acrylic is that once it's dried, I can no longer pick up the white paint with a wet brush. So I can work on it and smudge the color and fix it however I want. And if I don't like it, I can just wipe it with a wet towel or like a wet napkin, and I will have a fresh canvas to work on for the moon specifically. So that was very handy. At first I thought that I would be using variations of gray, white and black mixed together, but I quickly figured out that it's just easier to use gray with varying wetness and with varying degrees of a wet brush to vary the shades a little bit, and just smudge that around and blend it into the white of the moon until I was happy with the color and the texture and the shading of the moon. To be completely honest, at first the original plan was to leave the moon white. I wasn't going to do anything to it and leave the texture to speak for itself, but the texture wasn't all that visible if you didn't look closely or feel it with your hand. And so I decided to, try using the paint, and then if I don't like it, I can wipe it or do something about it. So that's what I did. And then I used some white paint to add some details. I had a few images on screen, but honestly, the moon, I can do whatever to it and it would look okay-ish. Now, for the title of this page, I had a difficult time figuring out what font I wanted to use. I found a few ones that I liked that were downloadable to use in a Word document or something like that, but I was really adamant about having swirls and swoops and loops and stuff decorating the letters, and that wasn't happening with the typeable fonts. So I found a really cool font on Pinterest that had a preview of all the letters with the swirls and such. So I ended up having to freehand the font, or trace it. So I traced March in the version that I liked best, and chose the M and the H to have the swirls, with the rest of the letters just regular. And I couldn't find a pen in my collection that perfectly matched the Parisian blue that I used, so I ended up deciding to just use the paint and a thin brush. I felt it was going to be a little too simple for me, so I ended up actually finding a really petite font, if you will, and used that to write under the stars, under the word March. So it would say March under the stars, which ties it to the theme, but also ties it to the event. And I thought that was a cool effect. And I ended up lettering that with the white shimmer paint. You can see in the close-up just how much the paper has warped, and also there is a little bit of bleed through and indents where I pressed the acrylic paint with the glass dip pen. So I really didn't want to work on this page, especially because of the bleed through. I tried to cover it with white paint, but it didn't really look nice. So I ended up cutting a page out of the back of my journal and just glued it here. I used liquid glue so that it would be easier to manipulate the page to fit with the warps of the original page, if that makes sense. Don't know if it helped, but that is what I did. I of course had to resketch the stuff that I had on the page underneath, and for some reason when I turned my camera back on, the lighting was a little off, but I didn't notice until I put all the clips together and started editing. I don't know what happened there, and I will try to fix it in post-edit adjustments and such, but hopefully it looks fine. I usually don't like to play much with post-production or like post-filming lighting and such, because I want the colors and the imperfections to show how they actually are in my journal. I really focus on my artwork transferring through the screen exactly as it is in my journal. Anyway, so the style I went with, which was a spur of the moment choice for the outlines and such, is I did like a corner detail, like a camera frame, if you will, and then I did that with the gouache paint, and then I used the bullet tip of the N95 Tombow to do the rest of the outlines, because the accent color is going to be gray. So I do have a decorative Dutch door here, and I wanted to get the outlining out of the way before we started on that, so I'm flipping to the other page. The first one was a calendar and dashboard situation, so a monthly log. The second page is going to be trackers. So Ramadan happens in March, it falls on the 1st of March actually, so that was really nice, and I decided to include a meal tracker just for memory keeping, and so that I can keep track of what we eat so we don't repeat things too often. So I made a big table for that, for a section for the 3 meals we typically eat, and then also a section for the day, and then the other tracker is going to be my reading tracker. And I used the N95 for all of the outlines. Here I also did second line highlights, which is another stylistic feature. I don't do it on the monthly review, but that's about the only place I don't do it on. The rest of the spreads are gonna have the second line highlights. And I'm getting better at them, but they definitely went askew in some places, and they're not all that even, to be completely honest, but character. Then to number the reading tracker and also title the columns on the food tracker table, I used a gray Food Touch brush pen. I also used that to number the calendar, but I did not film that. For the headers, I was looking for a font. At first I was going to use stickers, but I didn't. And then I was trying to find a really nice font, and I found one that I really liked, but it wasn't a version that I can download and then just type in a Word doc and it will give me all the swirls and nice things. So what I ended up doing is I actually had to trace the words on a tracing piece of paper, take a screenshot of that. I actually used a scanner app, so it would be like a really nice flat image. And then on a editing app, I actually used also a note-taking app to trace over the letters on my iPad, knead them up, also color them the same way, replicate them if I need to, and then printed that on sticker paper. And you can see me here fussy cutting all of that, and that's how I did all of my headers, because I really liked this font and I wanted to use it, but I also knew that it would be really difficult and time consuming and unnecessary work, to be completely honest, to trace it and do it by hand 20 times for this 4 weeks of March. So if I'm gonna print it for my weeklies, I might as well print it everywhere else. And that's what I did, except on the cover page, because it's just one word, simple enough, and then I like everything to be painted on the cover page if I can help it. So that's what I did. But yeah, I will have the image of the font on the screen and I will link it below, and I will also link the document of all the headers that I printed if I can get it to look neat enough. Now we can start on the decorative bit of these two spreads, which is going to be the Dutch door, and I wanted a fading of the blue sky fading outwards, and then the decorative Dutch door has the moon phases, and I'll put a couple of images on the screen of what inspired me to do this, but I felt like that was a really nice way to include the moon phases, make it decorative and fun, and also multi-purpose that, because then I would not need to do too much work, but also this was lengthy and repetitive and I had to do everything twice because I was doing it on both pages. But I'm using the same colors, just in a linear fading from the edge of the washi tape that I stuck down to get a crisp line to the edge of the paper. Using the same brushes, same color mixes, same techniques, doing as many layers as I needed to get an effect that I really liked. So this also warped the paper quite a bit, and I did have, unfortunately, a little bit of bleed through on the other side of the page, again on this one, but the spread after this one was going to be a weekly, and I didn't want to cut another page from the back, so I dealt with it. There was some second line highlighting going on already, and then once I write my tasks and such, it wouldn't be too visible. So for that one, I was fine with it being there. I'm honestly quite surprised that this bled through, because this is 170 GSM paper. This should handle quite a bit of water, because I've used paper with less weight and it handled more than this paper has done. Thus far, spoiler alert, I'm not really enjoying the experience of using the traditional bullet journal notebook choice, hardbound, dot grid, this specific binding. I'm not really enjoying it. There's a lot of issues here that I don't face with, my other choices of notebooks or with spiral bound. And yeah, I'm gonna tough it out for the rest of the year, but I'm gonna go back to something that I'm much more comfortable with for next year, probably. I do like trying new notebooks, but there's a lot of details that I am specifically concerned about that are never mentioned in review videos, because I've watched a ton. Because even though I don't buy any of the bullet journaling brands, I still watch all of the unboxings and reviews and such, because it's enjoyable, but they don't tell you about the, weird stuff. So alrighty, once the background was done and left to dry, I started to work on one side of the Dutch door itself, which has 7 circles down the middle in a straight line or a straight column for 7 moon phases. So starting with a crescent moon all the way to a full moon, and then back all the way to the last phase. Here I also used acrylic paint and the same technique, piling it on and then using saran wrap to get some texture going, leaving it to dry overnight before going in with black paint to add all of the details. I was not really decisive on how I wanted to color the rest of the moon because, for example, the crescent moon, only a little bit of it would be illuminated, the rest would be whatever dark background I chose, and I was going to go with blue, but I really didn't like that, so I decided to go with black. And even though I was only, going to texture the areas that are illuminated, I did add texture to all of to the entire circle. And I tried to keep the, placement of the grooves and dips and such similar, because this is supposed to be the same moon, just different phases. So, yeah. I used the white glitter paint to sprinkle glitter everywhere because it got on the paper underneath, even though I put protection, and then also everywhere on my desk and on my phone case and on my clothes. So it was everywhere. And then added some more stars with the white paint pen that I have, added a shooting star and some other details. This is how it looks with it all done. Because we have the same thing replicated on both sides, I did the second part of the background off camera and then also did the moon phases of that side off camera as well, just to get a feel on how I wanted to do it and practice a little bit before turning on the camera. And I wouldn't want to show the same step again because it's lengthy as it is. But yes, I used a small round brush and just black paint and some water, varying it, cleaning the brush in between to blend the black. And yeah, the key here is just to have the base color or the base layer be acrylic so that you can do whatever you want on top of it and it's not gonna rehydrate the paint and mess it all up for you. There isn't really a specific technique that I used when painting these moons. I was going by what felt good and looked good, and because I had that base layer of the acrylic, I could wipe off anything that I didn't like. And if you look really closely, it is quite scratchy, the texture of the moons, but I noticed that was actually a thing in the inspo images I pulled up for reference. I didn't try to copy them for a T, but I tried to mimic the general areas of lightness to darkness, just trying to make these circles look like a moon, right? If they give that illusion, then I've succeeded. Fun fact, drawing moons is actually not in my wheelhouse, and I have avoided it for a very long time because there is a lot of room for error. Sometimes it just does not look like a moon, and that is the epitome of failing when trying to draw a moon, right? So yeah, these look fine, but the one on the monthly review doesn't. I don't like that one. I also used a stippling motion on the line where the two areas of the moon meet, the lit area and the dark area, so it's not like a definite crisp edge from light to dark, if that makes any sense. Sort of like a fading or like a blurriness. And then these are circles. There's no way I'm gonna paint anything circular perfectly, so I went with my paint pen afterwards and touched up the areas around it. I really like how this ended up turning out. It looks really, really awesome with, being a Dutch door and the doubling of everything. And especially the dark sky behind it looks very beautiful. Alrighty, moving on to the weekly log. As you can see, there's a little bit of bleed through from the paint work on the opposite page. And for my weeklies, I wanted a very specific style, but I didn't want to do it. Okay, how do I tell you this? I wanted dailies or the look of dailies, but I didn't want to do dailies, if that makes sense. So I wanted the sections for each day to be uneven, as though I had a blank page and I came in every day and put in a new header and did the second line highlights, and it was all organic and such. But I didn't want to do that because I'm using printed headers and it was going to be a hassle to come in every day and cut and tape and do the second line highlights and everything. And I've tried dailies back in September and I didn't really like that aspect of it, because back then also I was using printed headers and I didn't find it productive to have the burden of coming in every morning to put in my header. I wanted it to be ready for me to come in, write my tasks, and get on with my day. So I decided to do a fake daily log, starting with doing second line highlights on the entire double pages. These are 6 centimeters and there is a break in between. I obviously missed some spots, but that is fine. Now we are actually going to be doing a little bit of decoration. I went with something really simple and really easy, which is just some sky fading into the second line highlights. On the first double weeklies, it's going to be fading from the top, or it's going to be a strip on the top of the page. On the next double spread is going to be from the bottom, if that makes sense. So I put 2 pieces of paper behind and also protected the other side of the page with washi tape so that the blue paint doesn't seep into there and ruin the look of that. And then using the blue paint, I faded it downward, and it was a really small section, so it was really easy and simple and fast to do. I do regret, however, that I didn't add any black to the faded areas, which look cyan, and they progressively look more blue every time I open my notebook, and I don't know if that's an optical illusion or not, but I think I forgot to do that step and I'm too lazy to go back because I've already put a smattering of stars on there, so it's gonna look messy if I tried it. But yeah, that's all the decoration that I did here. The rest is going to be the headers. My camera didn't film this for some reason, but I printed my headers and fussy cut around them, and now I'm, taping them in. So the days of the week are lettered in the same font that I've chosen and then also duplicated. So that was, a really nice shortcut, doing it once and then duplicating it for 4 weeks. But then, because I did the second line highlights already ahead of time, I couldn't really have a white area where I would put the header. So to combat this, I ended up also printing the numbering of each day. So from 02 to 30, I think, probably. And I cut that in a rectangle that covers the gray blockage of the line there. That way it would look nicer, I think. So I had to cut that, and of course I had mishaps with my X-Acto knife and had to reprint some of them. I also accidentally forgot to print 27, so I had to come back and print that at a later date. I had a duplicate of 21, so in the video I used that, but in the flip through you will see the fixed version. And then just figuring out how I wanted the weeklies to look, how the days are spaced, and where everything sits. From experience, I know that I can deal with whatever space I give myself. If you haven't watched my February setup, I had all 4 weeks on a singular double spread, and the sections were really small, but I used that and I dealt with it and it was fine. It was actually just enough. I don't really need a lot of space. So I wasn't overly worried about the mismatch of space that I gave for each day. If I have more space, I will add more details, even if it's unnecessary. If I have too little space, I will just deal with that. And then these are stickers. I can peel them and rearrange them if I wish to do so. On the other double weekly, I'm just doing the sky fading from the bottom and then the smattering of stars. Really simple, really effective, but also space maximizing. And then used the days of the week stickers and the numbering stickers to cover some of the especially cattywampus second line highlights that I have going on. Now we are moving to the last spread in this setup, which is going to be my monthly log and book summary. As you can see, I'm using tape to block off a large rectangle in the middle, and then I'll use the paint to feather out blue, starting from that washi tape edge outwards towards the notebook's edge. And actually, after I finished doing this, I realized that it was supposed to be the opposite. I was supposed to feather the blue from the notebook's edge towards the rectangle, if that makes sense. I will put a picture on the screen of what I originally thought of doing, but I totally forgot that, and I was in the groove of things and just did it this way. It was supposed to look like what I did on the weeklies, but on all edges of the page. I didn't do that. However, it looked really, really nice. I love how this looks. Probably one of my favorite spreads, even though it's really, really simple. I just love the effect. The washi tape was a lifesaver. I measured beforehand where I wanted it to be, blocked it off, then went ahead with the blue paint, feathering that out. And here I didn't forget to add a tint of black to tone down the blue that happens as a result of the feathering and the blending. After I finish all sides, I do a small crescent moon on the upper left side of the left page, where I'm gonna add a crescent moon, but that's about the only thing that I do decoratively here. I also add the headers, which are also stickers. I didn't do the sections of the monthly review while I was filming everything else because it was relatively early in February, so I wanted to leave it to a later date in case I wanted to change my mind. I didn't. I used the same sections. I always do this, but yeah, it was so late in the month that I wanted to get it done and not worry about filming it, and it's just, headers, stickers, and second line highlights. So yeah, you will see that in the close-ups and in the final flip through. The right page will remain empty until the end of the month when I do my reading summary. So I filmed this setup over multiple days, and when I came in to texture and add details to this crescent moon, I couldn't get it to look nice, and I kept adding and removing and adding and removing, and at some point in the footage it looks really nice, but then I continued working on it and I couldn't get it to look nice again. So I actually don't like it very much. It's really, really dark, but I gave up and decided to just accept it. We have reached the end of this video with the final flip through. I love how this theme turned out. Even though it's way out of my comfort zone, you wouldn't think with how much I love navy blue, but it truly is, even more in use rather than in setting it up, because as I'm recording this voiceover, I'm actually also using the notebook. But yeah, this is how all the spreads turned out. I love them. I'm really happy with the final look. Look forward to the setup in Project B because that one is spectacular. I love it. And I hope you will too. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.